Liberals promised Canadians a revenue-neutral tax cut, made possible by taxing high earners. But just 3 days into this Parliament, the Finance Minister admitted that they got the math completely wrong. Surprise. Promise made, promise broken. Will the Finance Minister make up for his $1.2 billion shortfall by raising taxes, or does he plan to tack another $1.2 billion onto the structural deficit he's building?
The federal finance minister was questioned multiple times today about his plans to cut taxes for the middle class, but he seemed to have one popular answer.
Mr. Speaker, we find ourselves in a more challenging situation than we expected. Mr. Speaker, we find ourselves with an economic situation that was not what we expected when we came into power. We found ourselves in a hole not of our hands.
I like the delivery the third time, the best, I thought. The government's tax changes are expected to put it an extra $1.2 billion in the hole each year. That shortfall wasn't part of the original plan. But it's not stopping the Liberals from moving ahead with it. Today, it introduced and passed a motion that includes the government's so-called middle-class tax cut and a tax hike for the 1%. The tax cut is expected to reduce government revenue by more than $3 billion in the first year. It'll be covered in part by a new tax bracket for those making more than $200,000 a year. That's expected to bring in about $2 billion. But the government admits it won't have the revenue to make up the rest. Time for the big picture. Bill Robson is president and CEO of the C.D. Howe Institute. Goldy Hyder is president and CEO of Hill & Knowlton Strategies. And Armine Yalnizyan is senior economist at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. Goldy, you like take number 3. I hope you agree with me on that front. I do want your perspective, first off, on whether or not this is simply bad math. Is that a legitimate concern?
Well, you know, they say that you should campaign in poetry and govern in prose. You know, when you look back at the campaign, I would suggest that, in fact, the government of the day today was well aware what it was going to inherit. It argued throughout the campaign that the information coming from the government was wrong, that, in fact, it's not in a surplus, that, in fact, it's going to be in a much larger deficit. And it turns out the current government was right. The deficit is much larger, unfortunately, because we have a slowing down economy. And so, you know, they find themselves having to, you know, course correct something here where I'm not sure that they thought through the plan as to how it is that they're going to be able to do both the tax cut and still say that the deficit is only going to be at $10 billion. And clearly they've admitted that it won't be at $10 billion.
Armine, do you think that's true? They didn't think it through sufficiently?
I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I do buy in part that the books are going to be cooked, but you don't know by how much. On top of that, in the period from when the election was called to when they're standing there answering questions in question period, we have seen a massive slowdown in the economy, which could not have been predicted.
Bill, does it matter? We're talking about the gap. It's $1 billion. Does it matter?
Sure, it matters, because there's a big difference between having a budget that's in balance and a budget that's in deficit. When you have a budget balance, you got a bottom line that forces people to trade off. If they want to spend $1 here, what are they going to, are they going to save $1 there? Are they going to tax $1 somewhere else? Once you're in deficit, that constraint's gone.
But they said in the campaign they would go into deficit. They came out in the thrones. There's been deficit the entire time here.
Well, it depends what the deficit's for. They talked about infrastructure spending. Now, part of what's happened, I just have to get this on because Bill Morneau knows a lot about pensions, and that's been a particular topic of mine. One of the reasons the federal budget balance is worse than it looked is because they have for years underreported the cost of their pensions, and they've just recognized a bit more of that cost. It's got nothing to do with a slowing economy. This is something that they've been underreporting for years. But on the whether the revenue shortfall is going to be as serious as they say, our own calculations used a very conservative number, my colleague Alex Laurent, and came up with a much larger revenue shortfall than what they're saying. And it's also going to affect the provinces. So the revenue base that the provinces are counting on for their fiscal balance is also going to get depressed by this. So the federal government isn't just creating a problem for themselves, they're creating a problem for the rest of the country.
Armine, for the individuals and families who are paying taxes every year, you'd argue that the group that'll benefit the most are between 124 and 200K. Is that?
That's just the way the math works. When you decide to do a tax cut in the second bracket, it affects everybody from the second bracket on up. And it turns out that when you look at the dollars and cents rewarded, only $600 million of the $3 billion cost of this tax cut is going to the people that are actually in the second bracket. most of the money is going to those in the top. So actually, one of the ways of balancing this would be to simply say, we actually didn't mean it to go to really rich people. We meant it to go to the middle class, and we're going to actually trim it back. So that would be one of the solutions.
One of the solutions, Goldie. Any other solutions that you have in mind?
I think, well, first of all, I think the solution is to how to grow your economy by having, more people pay less taxes. Ultimately, is the right way to do this, and that's something that's lacking. But one of the things I think the viewers are going to find out is they're in for a lot of surprises here. First surprise is the people who think they're middle class. Turns out you're not middle class. The people who don't think they're rich. Turns out you're rich by the definition of this government. So I don't know how far a $680 maximum tax cut to a family is going to go to stimulate an economy. I am all for tax cuts, believe me. In fact, I think that's the way to actually go about doing it. Raise the consumption tax, something that no one's ever talked about. But if they were to do that, they would be able to give up the tax cuts. But the real issue here, and I think the thing that they need to realize is governing is about growing, is about making choices, but it's also about growing your economy and not allowing government to become your economy. Where are we on competitiveness? Where are we on access to markets? Where are we on our trade policy? What are the things that Canada needs to do to compete in a much more competitive world is something that will help you grow your economy, not your deficit and your debt.
I just want to point out that $3 billion worth of a tax cut is more than double, it's almost double the amount that is going to in any one of these single infrastructure programs, whether it's social, public transit, or green, in every year.
And is that good or bad?
So I'm thinking, actually, if you want to grow the economy, why wouldn't you take this out of the tax cut bucket and put it into the things that we know will build the economy of the future?
I got to get in on this and just say that clearly the polling during the election campaign told them that giving it to the rich right in the slats was a popular position. And now that they're in government, they should think hard about the message that sends. We're in a war for talent. And what we are signaling very clearly with this is that if you're talented, if you're able, if you're an entrepreneur who wants to get rich one day, Canada isn't as attractive a place to do it as it used to be.
Move to the U.S. and have Trump be your president.
This is
perfect.
This is
Great
such
trade-off.
rubbish. This idea that if you tax people more, that they're going to move. Well, in fact, Alberta dropped the tax rate to 10% in the year 2000. We did not hear the sound, the giant sound of sucking from Quebec over to Alberta. Nobody moved. So if this is if this is the best idea,
to Alberta.
Not because of the tax rates in 2000.
It's all very well for you to say not because of this, but people did move to Alberta, and now
for
people
oil, for jobs, not for tax rates.
Just watch what happens to high-income people now. They feel the hate. They will go somewhere else.
Where are they
not to
go,
mention,
Bill?
they'll find a way. They will also, of course, find a way to not to have to pay that tax, and that's part
Which
of the
was
problem.
the point
right
I was
here.
going to ask,
That
Bill.
is the
This
issue.
is the issue. So, Bill, what are the ways that they will predictably endeavor to try and pay less tax in this new regime?
It's the nature of the tax base shrinking that you're never quite sure why it's happening. Some of it has to do with changing the way that you bring income in. It can be personal services corporations, and there are some measures here to address that. And some of it is immigration, and some of it is just plain not taking on the extra work. If you're in that tax bracket, say you're teaching on the side or something, you might say, okay, maybe I'm just going to not do that anymore because it's just not worth the reward.
Because I got to spend my time finding a job in some other low-tax country, right?
Well, there is also
right? That takes a lot of time.
Some countries,
who's my mover to move me to the valley.
welcome talent a bit more aggressively than what we do
I really
now.
don't understand how people that do make a lot of money say, basically invoke the Grecian formula. Catch me if you can. If you're going to tax me more, I'm going to make my money hide. Like, when is it okay for the people that make the most to say, it's okay if you don't pay your taxes. You suckers, you pay taxes. I'm going to take my money and put it somewhere else.
One other dynamic. Well, Goldie, make your point, and then I'll ask you a question.
I was just going to say that, the government, in fairness to the government, they ran on running deficits for the purposes of infrastructure. I think many of us felt that that was the play of the campaign and it worked for them. And basically people were saying, bribe me with my own money because right now I need jobs, right now I need to be able to get to work faster, et cetera. So that was good from their perspective. But now we're running deficits to subsidize tax cuts. And that was not in the platform. That's not a part of the agenda. So how quickly can this train run away when it's not even your first few days in Parliament? And we've already acknowledged that it's going to be well over $10 billion. One person in Ottawa today was talking about it be doubling that. That's going to be a big problem because we know one day those rates are going to go up in interest.
Goldie, they followed through on the plan to bring the TFSA limit back down. What's your view on that?
Well, look, I think it's a mistake. I know the minister has been saying, 93% of Canadians don't max out, but the fact is 11 million Canadians are participating in the TFSA, a relatively new
But
policy
they don't need the
idea
limit.
that
We're
has
not
been
even anywhere
executed with
close to
success, and we
maxing
need more
out.
people participating in that. I'm glad at least that they haven't taken it away in 2015.
They
I
could
hope everybody out
participate
there
if the
puts
limit
their
was $100
10 grand in.
It's a mistake because Goldy can't contribute $10,000.
I would like to see, speaking of pensions as I was, other people have the opportunity to get the same kind of retirement income that public servants do, and the TFSA was helpful in that respect. It's very unpopular cutting it. I think it's going to rise again.
I would
over
say
time.
Why
it's
would you
very
give a-
unpopular. It is
No, but the whole cost,
mildly
Bruce, is
unpopular.
The whole cost is $275 million to the government annually. That's it. That's what they're
because
getting back by
nobody was
doing that.
using it, Goldie. And why would you want to benefit the people?
No, actually, it's because the cost is further off in the future.
That is the big issue.
Yeah,
So
the
it's
cost.
my 5-year-old we're talking about here
That's
because we've got that tax revenue that simply won't come in if people aren't taxed on the gains from those investments.
Yes, that's right.
What is the number one thing, Armine, that you're focused on for this government now that we've moved through the first phrase of you broke your promise? What else are you jazzed about? What else are you interested in, focused on?
Well, I want to make sure that they hire back some of those people that got decommissioned at the Canada Revenue Agency that were into enforcing the rules. Because if you don't want to see the rates go up, at least broaden the base. And one of the ways you broaden the base is by stopping the leaking going out and making sure that the rules are enforced.
Bill, what's next? What else should we put on your crystal ball, your voodoo hat, whatever it is?
Well, they're still in campaign mode, and so we're hearing a lot of these promises about money and a lot of the bottom line stuff not mattering. And the time comes when the finance minister has to stand up to the prime minister and say, you know what, we're in government now, we got to make choices.
Goldy, very brief last word to you. What are you looking forward to?
Grow the economy, invite investment, become more competitive, allow access to markets, get those trade deals signed.
All right, that was relatively brief. Thank you very much to the
Thank
big
you.
picture.